What we've seen in a lot of the projects that have been announced, they announced a project in Edmonton, for example, about 411 homes. Only 13% of them are affordable, and this is on public land. So they're using public land to build homes, which is a great idea, but only 13% are affordable.
So then what do you want them to do differently?
We want 100% of the homes to be affordable. If you're going to build land or build home on public land, every single one of them should be affordable.
NDP leader Jagmeet Singh this morning laying out some of what he hopes to see in the government's upcoming fall economic statement, a mini budget of sorts. His wish list carries a lot of weight, with the NDP propping up the minority Liberal government right now, which also helps avoid an election at a time when the Tories are seeing surging support in the polls. But the feds have also promised to exercise fiscal restraint next week with this fall economic statement. Take a listen.
We have to be sure that we make the investments Canadians need, provide them with the support they need, but do it within a fiscally responsible framework. We won't be able to do everything.
Let's bring back the front bench to talk about that. Christy Clark, John Tory, and Tom Mulcair. Tom, I'll start off just asking you about the political dynamics here, because just like this time a year ago, Mr. Singh is able to come out, talk about how he'd like to see rent subsidies and more action on housing, for example. And a year ago, all the things he talked about, lo and behold, turned up in the fall economic statement. How likely do you think that is this time around, too?
Well, I think I would listen to that last statement by Chrystia Freeland very carefully. We can't do everything. Of all the things that are on the table, there's one that's crucial to this debate, and it's whether or not Mr. Trudeau is going to respect that part of his deal with Mr. Singh, forward legislation to provide for Pharmacare. Now, it can be a framework, and Mr. Trudeau is certainly going to have a partly private, partly public system. Mr. Singh is insisting that it's going to be an absolute fail unless it's fully public. No, the best and most complete system in Canada is a hybrid system. It's in Quebec and it works. So Mr. Singh can say that because he works closely with the public sector unions, and of course, pleading for more public sector jobs is part of his role. But I don't think that that's a deal breaker. What would be a deal breaker, though, is if they don't bring forward that legislation. So keep an eye on that, because it really could be tricky. One thing that I would add, and everybody tends to forget this, we saw it on the carbon tax. It was a big issue. It could almost have been called a confidence question. What happened? The Bloc Québécois back from Mr. Trudeau. Poilievre can say that it's a deal between the separatists and Trudeau. He'll score a political point on that. But it is a simple fact that the Bloc has more than enough seats, has a lot more seats than the NDP, has more than enough seats to prop up the Liberals on any confidence vote. And by the way, the Bloc has no interest whatsoever in going to an election. So whether or not the deal between Singh and Trudeau gets torn up, and I don't think it will, but if it ever were, the Bloc's going to prop up the Liberals for as long as it takes. Trudeau's going to be the one to decide the date of the next election. He crosses the lawn or the snow from Rideau Cottage to Rideau Hall, and he gets a writ. That's how it's going to happen.
Yeah, I don't have any sense, Christy, that the NDP is laying any of the groundwork for being able to say at the end of the fall economic statement, it's not enough, we're leaving. It seems as though they don't even expect the Pharmacare legislation to come in the fall economic statement, that it will likely come after. And like Tom said, it's just legislation they need to introduce. They don't need to even say when it's going to be implemented or attach the money to it at this point in order to satisfy the deal. So to me, the signals right now are that things stay status quo. I'm not sure. What is your sense?
Well, I think Jagmeet Singh has a problem fundamentally in that the Liberal Party led by Justin Trudeau is basically like the NDP, not the NDP that was led by Tom Mulcair, something a little bit more interventionist and bigger spending than he would probably imagine if he was the Prime Minister of Canada. So I think that's a political problem for them if their voters are going to go and support, kind of the de facto sort of left-wing party in Canada, which is now Justin Trudeau's party. So there's that. I do think, though, I think Tom's political analysis is absolutely spot on about when the election will be called. I think Prime Minister Trudeau is going to hang on for as long as he can until he feels the time is opportune for him to run again. And I also think, in answer to your question about the fall economic statement, it's a real problem because Canada has seen our GDP growth ratio stagnate for the last 6 years. We've seen our standard of living compared to other OECD countries just drop precipitously. We are seeing all kinds of really terrible statistics that suggest Canada needs to get a hold of the debt and the spending and the growth in government and the growth in taxes. If we don't have a fall economic statement that really decides to hit those things head on, I don't think Canadians are going to find themselves better off next year than they are even this year.
At the micro level, though, John, and you've spoken about this before, there's also a lot of pressure on the government to address the affordability crisis at a more individual level, right? And you can hear that in the way that people are still really grappling with the cost of living here. And the government is sort of sending two signals that at times seem at odds with each other, right? The message we heard from Minister Freeland about we can't do everything, and then also at the same time, talking frequently about we're going to do more on affordability, more on housing, think about rents. How can you do both of those things at once, or how do you communicate around that?
I don't know. First of all, I should say I think Christy is 100% right about the fact that what you'd wish this economic statement might do is focus a little bit on how we can get our economy back on track, because that will help Canadians with affordability if they're doing better and if the economy is doing better and there's more and better jobs. But I think we have to also look at the fact, if you read carefully the words of what Jagmeet Singh has said he wants, leaving aside the pharmaceutical program, which may or may not be a litmus test in this statement. He said he wants things like price fixing addressed to bring down grocery prices. Well, I don't know how much price fixing, if any, there is going on, but that's a fairly straightforward thing for the government to deal with in some way or other. It's not going to really affect grocery prices, though. The price of oranges in California is going to have more to do with that. And the same is true on the housing issue, where he talks about how we should be putting more of the money, the rent finance assistance and so on, into nonprofits and cooperatives, and they actually have some money in the National Housing Strategy. So I think you'll see that get announced or re-announced as part of saying, okay, we're satisfying some of what he said. There's no way you're going to have buildings that are going to be 100% affordable unless the government comes up with a lot more money. But I think then the other side, they have kind of addressed nothing happens by accident, where they made that announcement, even though we talked about it here and said it was a drop in the bucket, which it is, of $500 million in savings. So I think they'll trumpet that, cancel a couple of things that we haven't heard about, and make it sound like they're tightening their belts, which they've made it almost impossible for themselves to do.
Tom, from a communications perspective, or maybe a more political perspective, you're sitting around in the Prime Minister's office over the next few days or over the past few weeks with the Finance Minister. Are you hoping that you can land something that resonates with Canadians, that sort of draws a few headlines that are not about the carbon tax, for example, or something like that? Or are you hoping it just flies under the radar?
No, I mean, competency in public administration and the ability to manage the public purse are a couple of the weaker spots for Mr. Trudeau and his team. And they've got to start answering that criticism by Poilievre. They've got to have a better answer than the one that they have right now. So this is an opportunity to do just that. I mean, balanced budgets. I remember running on balanced budgets in 2015. Boy, that sounds like it was a century ago, because we're at hundreds of billions of dollars now in new debt since the pandemic. And Mr. Trudeau had already blown, the budget by $100 billion before the pandemic hit. So the public doesn't have a detailed sense of what this means, but they have an overall sense of what it means. And it comes in at a time when, inflation is high, the cost of living is high, people are worried economically. They want a sense that the government's got a handle on this. It's not been one of the strengths of Mr. Trudeau, and I think that he's got to begin answering that. I think that's part of their communications plan, to answer your question, come next week.
I just have time for one last question and one last answer, Christy. Just to play devil's advocate for a second, the government has blown past their initial promises of small and modest budgets in many different instances right off the bat, and then further so through the pandemic, and they keep getting reelected, albeit with a smaller portion of the popular vote, but they do keep getting reelected. Is it maybe not the most politically important thing to Canadians in the immediacy? I know we're all talking about the long-term impact of that debt and of the deficits, but are maybe when Canadians vote that they are not as concerned about it as the three of you?
Well, I mean, federal government spending and its impact on the economy has a long lag. So being irresponsible with the public's money, growing government, raising taxes is all kind of, well and fine or lost in the debate, as long as people are still doing okay. But then eventually that starts to really bite, that that irresponsible government management, a lack of control of the public books. And this is what we're starting to see now, is we're starting to see stagnating wages, stagnating productivity, our standard of living going down compared to the rest of our peers in the world. That is the result of 10 years of mismanagement, and it takes a while to catch up. And to what John said a little earlier, the federal government can do some things to try and improve people's sense of being able to keep up. They can cut taxes. They can cut regulation. They can make sure that we're attracting more investment. And cutting taxes is probably the single most important and quickest thing the federal government can do to make people's lives a little bit easier every day. And the rest of the stuff will take longer to fix. That's something they could do in the statement if they decided to do so.
Well, I look forward to reconvening next week to evaluate what happens. I'm so sorry, John. I have to take the commercial break, but I appreciate the discussion tonight. Thank you, John Tory, Tom Mulcair, and Christy Clark, our front bench.